Wow, big crowd. Usually, this is, you know, how many people have participated in open space sessions before? No? No, you don't know what it is. Well, a bunch of people show up. Of course, there is a general topic. There's not necessarily an agenda. And then you ask people to get into groups. Typically, there are 4 to 6 tables that can accommodate about 8 people. And at each table, they brainstorm and they come up with maybe 4 to 6 you know, tickets or some sort of, you know, piece of paper like this, but each one would have an independent topic, right? So they come up with 4 or 5, 6. And then all of them get posted on a wall. And then you see if you have any duplicates, you kind of arrange them by topic. And then everybody gets like a marker like this. And depending on how many people you have and how many topics you have, everybody gets like a couple of votes, like 3 votes or 4 votes. And they come by and they vote on things, right? Because there will be a lot more topics than you can cover in the open space session. And then you start with the top 6, you send them back to the tables, and you always have a group of people, you have a mix of people. You do it with professionals, and in general what happens is some of them are experts at the topic, but they want to learn about something else. And sometimes they'll sit at a table where they'll be an expert, another time they'll be at a table where they're not. And typically they talk about the subject for about 10-15 minutes. They come up with better questions. They also come with some success stories. So pretty much you're networking with peers, right? And then they come up with questions for the person facilitating. So then that person will answer the questions, right? But you also have a chance to talk with people that have some experience, so you get some feedback from your peers. I think that the experience with Kanban here is pretty limited, right? And initially when I proposed that we do an open space, I was told there will be about 12 people to 16 people. I think that was based on the room that initially folks had in mind. So now we'll adapt, we'll adjust quickly. I would still like to hear kind of what are some of the topics of interest. So I will still do an exercise, but we're not going to do the posting and the voting. It's not going to make sense. We're probably going to take a half an hour to do just that. Let's see. How many folks in here are in a mid-level to high-level management role? Mid-level to high-level management, okay. How many people, for everybody else, what roles are you in? Developers, program managers, a mix, or mostly program managers?
Junior.
PM? Okay. Yeah, the folks in mid-level to upper, all the way up in management roles, can you raise your hand again? Just trying to see how. Right. So it's about half and half. Okay. Let's do this. So we're going to stand up and we're going to have the folks who raise their hand go to, let's say, this side of the room. And it's not going to take long, okay? And the folks who haven't raised their hand, they come kind of on this side of the room. And it's a group conversation. You don't have to do introductions or anything, but talk about, you know, what kind of some of the things that you want to find out about. So the reason I'm doing this separation is because there could be some, there always are some differences, right? The folks who do the work versus the folks who manage the teams who do the work or have more interactions with customers, things like that. So let's do that for about 5 minutes. I need a couple of things though. I still want someone who take with you some of the bigger post-it notes, something like this, okay? And you can split them into a couple of things because there's fairly large groups. So make sure I would say you have about 3 people in the group armed with these notes and with something to write. Yeah, I love cards, but those are very small. Okay, well, so you're gonna go to one group? Okay, fine. So you think 3. Okay. All right. So write down. So I would like to get like a topic, right? So each one of these should have a topic. So as a group, I say, okay, what do we want to find out? Okay. What do we want to find out? Why are we here? What do we want Rauch to talk about? Right? As a group. And I really don't care how many you come up with, but let's not take more than 6-7 minutes. Okay? And then we'll see what we find out, and I'll get going. Make sense? 2 groups, post-it notes, then you give those back to me. Do you have any questions? I said the people, you're in a management role. So the people in a management role, are you kidding? Come on this side. And the folks who are not in a management role, on this side. What are you looking for? But try not to take home, because I know the 2 of you, so. Involve other people. Alright, they're not biting, come on. Speak loud, say what you want to hear. It could be things like, oh, I want to know some basics. I want to see an example, case study, or how do you deal with this situation? Something, you know. You don't have to write a book on the sticky note. One per sticker, yeah, and you don't have to write an essay. It's just something to give me an idea of what the topic is. Okay? There are, of course, a lot of basic questions. How do we get started? From where to start? So that's another category. There are several. There's about 4 of them that talk about how do we sell to client, how do we encourage the project team to start using, which is what we sell to the team. Another one about the client, and another one about the team. Okay. Then we have all these basics. How do I start? What type of project is it good for? Put this here. Risks in Kanban, tasks in Kanban. Let's try to get the Kanban and Scrum and all these methodologies out of the way. This is weird. I'll see if I like it or not. I don't. No, I don't. I don't know if it helps you better, but if this is okay, then I'd rather run it. So this is a field report, more like, if you want, it's not a case study, but it's based on what other people are doing, and it's something that I really like. Part of my history with Kanban, I helped also build this movement around the world. It's not my movement, I want to be very clear. I make a joke, I usually say that there are 2 kinds of people. There are people who write books, and people that books are written about. I don't write books. The guy who wrote the book, the manual on Kanban, if you want, he was at Microsoft. He already wrote a book before. It was called Agile Management. I don't recommend it. He's a very good friend. The book talks about a lot of like queue management, theory of constraints. It's very theoretical. It's not a practical book. It's more of a philosophical book. I did find something very useful in there, which was about theory of constraints. And I saw there are some questions about how to manage bottlenecks and how to improve flow and so on. So we will talk about the theory of constraints. I'll explain how that works, what it means, and how we can apply it to software engineering, because it's a technique from manufacturing. Like pretty much lean has been created in manufacturing. Let's see. A lot of times this question comes as Scrum versus Kanban, and I write versus and then I cross it. You don't have to choose. You don't have to choose. You don't have to choose. You're gonna have only forks or only spoons in the kitchen drawer, right? You have both.
You have other things in there, and you pick whatever you need based on how you like to use it, right? I want to also make it very clear, because I'm kind of starting in different slides. Kanban is about continuous improvement. Is Kanban a software development lifecycle methodology by design? It's not. You may have a lot of questions. How do I do story sizing in Kanban? How do I do the release in Kanban? How do I solve this particular situation in the business analysis or in the project management or in some other phase of the software delivery lifecycle that you have at your company, right? Kanban says the first principle is start with what you do now. So the question is, okay, well, how are you doing it now? What are you trying to prove? So we always start about, we have some situations that we try to improve in the workshop. I will give you a glimpse later on, and we're going to come back to that later. We do a series of exercises. But the first exercise we do is, what is preventing the team from being successful? What is preventing the customer from being successful? What is the customer telling you that they don't like about what you deliver to them, and what are the team members saying that prevents them from being successful? Okay, so that's where you start. And then you get to the design of the board and the design of the ticket and the design of all these artifacts later on. Now, it doesn't mean that Kanban cannot be used for software development lifecycle, but you better know what you're doing. Okay, and I'll give you some examples. All right, so what I have here is just a description. It's just a bit of a comparison, and compare some main parts from Scrum and actions to Kanban, right? Everybody's familiar with Scrum, right? Is anybody not familiar with Scrum at all, or a group of people? No, right? Okay. I have seen all the eyes up here for a while. Do you have any questions on this slide? Okay. So it's pretty much, here is a picture of Scrum, here is a picture of Kanban. In Scrum, so pretty much these two are synonymous. It's just that this one has a bunch of words and this one is more, it's just a couple of images. So we split the organization into different smaller teams, right? We take a big project, we break it down, a big box, into small boxes. We stack those boxes in terms of value, and we start delivering into chunks or increments or sprints, iteratively, right? Okay? With Kanban, we don't make any organizational changes. We start from where we are. However, this piece, again, it makes sense. You apply it. So if you say, well, how can I apply Kanban to Scrum? If you have a Scrum process that works for you, and we'll come back to this, what it means, when does it work well, when it doesn't work well, and Kanban may be a better candidate, you may have just a board, more like a Kanban board, part of your Scrum implementation. Most Scrum teams, and tell me if this is your case, they used to have some boards that said to do, doing, and done. Is that your case? Yeah? Okay. So teams evolved into saying, okay, part of what they take from Kanban, instead of having to do, doing, and done, especially if they have a lot of cross-team dependencies, right? In order to understand and to manage better those dependencies, they start to build a team that shows all those teams, build a board that shows all those teams on the board. So here are the things that we want to do next, and then here are development, testing, release, and done. A lot of times, why do you want to build a board like this is because the people who do the release, they want to see the items that are arriving. Typically teams, they start to have in between these lines, they start to have some sort of a cycle time, a timeline, right? So back to the question that you had earlier, right? When you group apples to apples, and we said watermelons and bicycles to bicycles, right? You may have different things that you make, right? But if you group them correctly, you're going to end up with an average cycle time for each one of them. So this one, you put it, usually teams have it on the board, or they have some charts or some reports. So if your job is release and you see things coming, you can tell, is it an apple, is it the watermelon, or is it the bicycle? So you know when it's going to arrive in your queue. Okay? I'm going to give some more examples later, but right now we're going to just summarize from the perspective of Kanban. What else is different between Kanban and Scrum in this case? Over here, you make a commitment, you may use points, you may use different approaches, and you say, okay, we're going to take a chunk of work, maybe 20 points worth of work, and for 2 weeks, that's all we're going to do. We're not going to do anything else. It's very simplistic, right? Sometimes maybe you have some trade-offs, right? Okay. With Kanban, these things are done based on capacity. So you have a capacity for the team. You see all these numbers here. It means you try to limit the capacity for the. You try to limit work in progress based on your capacity, which means I have 3 plus 2 plus 3 here, so I have 8. I have about 8. This is not in progress. These are to do. They have not been started yet. Some teams have a limit on this also. I will explain that later. But pretty much what they are working on, what's work in progress, is these things right here. Okay. What happens is if they have capacity, see they have 3 tickets in here, but there is only 1. There's a limit of 2, and they have 2 in progress, which means right now they cannot take anything else from there because they have reached their limit. These people, they're able to pull if any one of these are done, but it's a very simplistic board. But pretty much in Kanban, anything can come in whenever there is capacity, and anything can be released or done as it reaches these lines. It's not waiting for all the other pieces to come along, unless those pieces have dependencies and they need to be part of the same build. Okay? I have better slides to exemplify this, but right now I know you're curious, I know you're looking at it and you're going to get hung up on this picture. Don't, because you're going to come back to a better picture. Right? We're just going to talk more about the different methodologies here. So, here we have the elements that are common to Scrum. We're going to compare them to how this is done in Kanban. So feel free to read through them. We have iterations, and I'm only going to read through a couple. Time box iterations are prescribed, right? So in Scrum, everything is prescribed. And I even had people, we had a workshop for 2 days, and there were some folks, and they said, well, you have to do everything in Scrum. You have to do the same thing in Kanban, because in Scrum, if you don't do a certain artifact, if you don't have a certain ceremony, then you're not doing Scrum. And I don't believe in this. I'm director of Agile practice for a $20 million company. And we do Scrum, we do Kanban, we do everything. But we don't sell methodology. We ask the client, what problems are you trying to solve? And based on those problems, we may recommend Scrum, we may recommend Kanban, we may recommend SAFe. How many people are familiar with SAFe? Okay. We may recommend disciplined agile delivery, we may recommend test-driven development, we may recommend XP, we may recommend any combination of all these things based on the problems you're trying to solve. Or PMI, or agile PMI, right? We teach all these classes, we have coaches, coaching on all these things. But it's never about the methodology, even though a lot of times clients call us and say, okay, we want classes in Scrum, or we want classes in agile team training, or we want classes on Kanban. So what problems are you trying to solve? Because a lot of times they don't know, they may not understand. By the way, if you want to do a mailing list, or you'll have my information. I will show it, towards the end. I also have business cards. I don't think I have so many business cards with me, but I can make this. A lot of these things, decks, okay, available to you in a PDF format. Okay. So in Scrum, coming back to this, everything is prescribed. In Kanban, things are recommended. And I was saying in the other session, if it makes sense to you to do something, do it. If not, why would you do it? Right? Now, our mentality at my company is the same for all these methodologies. Okay? So, let's see, Kanban for iterations. Time box iterations are optional. What does that mean? It means that when you have a Kanban board, you can say, on Monday, we take in 20 things, and that's it. For the week, we just work on them. Okay? Make sense? Now, the team will take things in such a way that everything can be done, let's say, in 5 days, if you want everything to be done by the end of the week. We're going to come back to some of these details. Now, the release can happen just like in Scrum. You wait until everything is done, you do it, then when you release, if that makes sense to you. Or, for other teams, it makes sense to release everything as soon as it reaches the column to the right, whatever that is. Deployment, UAT, it gets validated in the deployment or in UAT, and you release to your customer. Make sense? Why all these different approaches? Because again, it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. Let's have a couple of examples. Let's say that this group here, they are developers, They are dedicated developers to a product. Maybe they are building a new product, maybe they are building an iteration of an existing product. They do not support production issues. They do not support other products. They are 100% dedicated to the project. No interruptions. Let's say that this team here does all of the above. And they don't work only on one project. They have several projects. Maybe you are a team that you are in an IT organization, or maybe you support a customer that has many products. And right now you work on a couple of things, but tomorrow the customer has a production issue. Or you just deploy something to production or a major release, and the whole week you're going to have a bunch of production issues. Stop and go, stop and go. What do you do with production issues? You want to address them as soon as possible, and you have to release as soon as you have a fix, right? So you can't wait. And you're going to have to put a lot of things on hold. You have a lot of changes in priorities. So in this case, Kanban is preferred. Can you do this with Scrum? Well, yeah, you can, but your commitment, see, you need to understand how much of your time do you spend towards the projects that you work on, how much time do you spend on production issues, how much time do you spend on whatever else that you work on, okay? And some things what they do, they may rotate people. They may say, okay, every day we're gonna have 2 people who are gonna deal with the production issues. They usually, in the community of practice that we have, they refer to as goalkeepers, like in soccer, right? They try to catch all the balls that are being shot at them, yeah? And they rotate. So they don't do Scrum at all. They don't work on those projects, but they rotate, maybe for a week, maybe for 2 weeks, maybe for a month. And then they go back into the pool, working on the project, someone else replaces them. So, or you can say, we only take 10 points of work in the project because we have so much other things to do for production and maintenance, whatever, right? So that's why the work is optional, because you have all these situations, and Kanban is not prescriptive. This is an advantage, but it is also a disadvantage. The disadvantage is that the teams feel, okay, what do I do? And I have the biggest challenge I have is with US government organizations who are very bureaucratic. They're very top-down, command and control. They're not agile at all. And the US CIO, who reports to the President of the United States, prescribed a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, that all the government organizations have to move from waterfall to an agile approach. And they all now sign up, they all want agile training, they all want agile transformations, but they're not equipped to deal with it. And people want to be told. They're not self-managed teams, and very likely in the next 10 years, very few of them will be. Because there are people who work there for 25 years and they've been indoctrinated. You know, you don't do anything unless you're told to. And it's a very strict process. So anyway, we're working through that. Commitments. Team commitments to a specific amount of work in this iteration, in Scrum, right? Kanban commitments can be based on lead times, can be easily predicted, okay? And so on and so forth. So you had some time to look at this. Do you have any questions on any of these elements? Because there's a lot more. I have also a comparison between a team that worked with Scrum and with Kanban. Any questions on any of these elements? Now, my recommendation is you may not follow Scrum the way it's described here. If you are in a situation, and I have customers who do this, we build our own table of reference, if you want. This is an example. It's not going to address all the situations. And sometimes I have a workshop or I'm at a conference and people say, oh, but that's not how we work. It doesn't, it's an example. And it is an example working from real companies. So the idea is that you would create your own, okay? So no matter how you create this table, you will see that both Kanban and Scrum satisfy, well, of course Scrum does, but Kanban also satisfies the principles of the Agile Manifesto. That's the only point of this couple of slides. Here is a picture of a team. This is a very mature team. Everybody's familiar with eBay, right, as a company? Okay. This was a development team on eBay. The development manager had about 20 years of experience, very experienced development manager. All the people there were very experienced. They have been using Scrum for a long time. And you can see here the points. You can see the cumulative average, and also the variation they have from one sprint to another. They were working on 1 week sprints, and somewhere here, right on this line, they switched to Kanban. So before we go into the details about this, what was the nature of their work? What was their context? They were supporting, like this team here, I was using it as an example, supporting production issues, they were supporting multiple projects, work was changing all the time, there was some unpredictability, right? And they couldn't keep their commitments very well because, again, they make a commitment, something happens in production that they could not predict, they have to drop everything, they have multiple stakeholders, right? Multiple customers. Okay, so what happened when they switched to Kanban? They've got 138% improvement in throughput. The variation went down, so now you see the cumulative average is very stable. They found out that they are a lot more focused as a result. Their quality has gone up. They have a lot less rework. This is something very common that we hear with Kanban, no matter who implements it. When they remove, when companies decrease the amount of work in progress and they focus on fewer things, they have a lot less rework. It goes from anywhere from 50%, it can go to about 20% or 10%. This is not something new. In manufacturing, the companies that have moved to lean, right, found out the same thing and improved their quality. Now, there are tools like this, and these are available, for free. It's an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of questions that shows you at different points in time how good you are getting at practicing Kanban based on the 6 principles. There's some questions, there's some scoring, there's nothing magic about it. And here are the boards. These are the Kanban boards that this team was using once they moved to Scrum. So you see they have a top-level board. Someone had a question, some of the questions were around, can you have multiple boards to show to different people in the organizations? People in a higher level will have an interest to know more about the portfolio, right? From a portfolio perspective, from a program perspective, maybe even to see multiple projects. And a similar concept, this is not a portfolio board, but a similar concept is used. It's pretty much like a relational database. You can create different views, right? If you use Kanban, if you use an electronic tool, it's very easy to create these different views. Are people using physical boards to do the same thing? Absolutely. There are people in manufacturing, in companies, top companies, like, if you're on Toyota, if you're on Mercedes or, Volvo, they've been using Kanban in manufacturing, and we know actually the IT organizations of these names that I mentioned, they also use Kanban. And they have all the technology in the world. There is something about the physical boards and the conversations that happens, they call them some war rooms or Gemba rooms, and they're pasted, with all these boards, and that's where they do a lot of planning. They have a projector, it's connected to a computer, they can drill down into Jira or Jira, or whatever tool they use, and get all the details. But the planning is done with these physical boards, and the conversation happen between people in a room. Do they have remote teams? Absolutely they have remote teams. The client I was working with in Charlotte, that's how I met DevPro, they've had about 12 to 14 people from DevPro, and they've had a meeting, I don't remember the time of day, it was right at the end of day here in Kharkiv, I think 4 o'clock your time, right? And they've had a video projector, they had everything, so they had them on video, everybody was sharing, they could see the physical board, but also they were going through all the things in Jira together. Okay. So, what do we see on the top board? We see top-level items. There's a lane for each type of work. There's something called an expedite. Those are things that have to be done with urgency, usually production issues. When you work on expedites, the agreement is that the whole team is working on those tickets first before they touch anything below, right? Now, the whole team. Not necessarily, but whoever is needed. If sometimes you have an emergency and it requires these 3 people and they have tickets below, the tickets below will be blocked and they will be working on production emergency. If it is a complex situation where there's not enough skill, maybe everybody's going to put down everything they do and they're going to brainstorm or they're going to do different troubleshooting or work on this issue. But I want to take priority. If you don't have any expedites and they have standard work and intangible, what does these things mean? Standard are change requests that come from your sales and marketing people, that come from your customers, right? It's functionality, more about functionality. Intangibles are things like, well, okay, we do all these things, but we have to upgrade our SQL platform. We have to upgrade maybe our routers. Maybe we have to patch something. Maybe there are things we have to do that your customers don't care about. And a lot of times they will push work at the expense of these things. And then you're going to have production issues, right? Because you fall behind. It's called, people also, do you call it technical debt? Yeah, okay, so that's what it is. Those are intangibles. Most teams who use Kanban, they reserve about 20% on average, that's the most common, very rarely 10%, sometimes 30%. When they have a lot of technical debt, they have a lot of production issues, they allocate about 30% to the intangibles. So they allocate capacity to all of these lanes, and based on that, they put these limits on top, how many things they can have. So in here you see they open them, they have a column for refine, engineering buffer, analysis, dev test, acceptance, and deployed. So that's how the tickets move from, they're being pulled from right to left. It's not really a push, only the expedite tickets get pushed, which means you start from here and all the eyes are on this ticket and you try to get them from one stage to another until it's deployed. Everything else on the Kanban board kind of happens from this end, and you say, okay, what are the next things that we need to deploy? And how the focus is, if these people need help, these tickets will take more priority than the ones to the left. If they need help from these people on the left, then these people will help them get these things done. So again, these are more about the mechanics of Kanban. But there are some other views here. So there's a board that shows tasks by story. Okay? So these are the top level items, and you see here E3, it is E3. So imagine this is a relational database. There's a relationship between this ticket and this board through this lane. So you see here all the tasks by story, right? And you see in what stage of work they are. If they have been started, if they are, someone is working on them, if they are being reviewed or done, right? And now if you want to know who's working on what and who is free or who has too much work, then there is this board. And this one shows tasks by engineer. There was a question in the initial session, is that person here? There was a question whether you can manage multiple projects. It's a very similar approach. You have a high-level board where you do what's called portfolio work, where you plan what are the next things that you need to prioritize and work on. And there are some different boards for different teams. Make sense? Okay. So how is this team working compared to Scrum? Well, let's see. So the planning here is the input cadence and the output cadence. This means what are we going to start? And they do it on a weekly basis. So everything that you saw on those boards, they don't pull things every day. They just say every week on Monday, they have a prioritization meeting, a planning meeting if you want, or an input cadence meeting, whatever they call. Everybody calls it something else. And they say, what are the things that we want to pull in this week? The output, the release, is on demand. Okay? If the team who is deploying here is ready to deploy, they're going to pull things from the left, they're going to pull them in here, and they're going to deploy. They're not going to wait for all these tickets to come along unless there are tickets that have dependencies. Okay. Oh, yeah. It just so happens that this person, the manager, is also a Zen practitioner, so you may see some terms if familiar with Zen practice, like practice foundation, high order practice, and enlightenment. He's also a funny guy, but you'll see something here referred to as RoboScrum, batch, processing and RoboScrum. Why wasn't Scrum working for them? Why did they choose to change to a different methodology? It was because RoboScrum here means Scrum by management decree. So someone at a very high level in eBay said that from now on, everybody has to use Scrum, with any regards to whether or not Scrum makes sense for that team. And these guys were struggling very hard. They kept missing commitments, okay? Or they kept missing putting things in production. They were working only on emergencies, whatever was hot. There was a lot of stuff that was stuck, okay? They were interrupted. And once they moved to Kanban, that was not the issue anymore. Because they would adapt, right? They would say, okay, you want something else? Sure, we can start working on it. Here is what gets impacted, right? And they had a lot less work in progress, but you saw it from a productivity perspective, they were doing a lot more. There are some questions. I'm going to switch to a different section of the presentation. There are some questions about Lean and Agile. The main mantra of Lean is to reduce waste. Okay? The main mantra of Six Sigma, if you want, is to reduce variation. Six Sigma, we have not seen any companies who are very successful applying Six Sigma to software engineering. It's very complex. We know of companies who are using Six Sigma, and the tools that I know, one is the largest defense manufacturer in the United States that makes satellites and things that the Defense Department is asking them to build. And the other one makes medical equipment. They do use Six Sigma when they build medical equipment and when they build satellites. They use a lot of very heavy waterfall methodologies, but they use those methodologies for planning. The execution of whatever they plan to build, they don't care if further down the line. So there's a combination of waterfall and Agile and Six Sigma and Lean, right? So all these things can work together based on how it makes sense. In this case, the waterfall part is more around managing the projects and around the planning of the projects. These are multi-billion-dollar projects, right? But there are teams within the organization that work iteratively or use a flow-based approach. So before I jump to a different presentation section, do you have any questions on any of this? Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question regarding this board by tasks, right? So these boards represent tasks that are related to a certain user story. Could you please switch this slide?
Yes.
So here we have a limit to work in progress in, for example, engineering buffer, right? Through maximum. And does this buffer include tasks by story limit? So we have a story that has, for example, 6 tasks implied. And how do we limit work in progress for top-level work items when we have another limit for work in progress in this lower level board?
So the top-level board is meant for communication with the stakeholders, okay? And the bottom-level board with the tasks is meant for the people doing the work to figure out in what order or how they collaborate, if anybody needs help, if anything gets blocked, okay? The limits that drive all the work for the team are on the top board.
So what determines this 3 limit and 6 limit?
Oh.
Or doing there and doing there, for example.
Okay, it's about the capacity of the team.
Right, and so in this higher board, we know that we can do 3 stories at a time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the lower board, we are doing 6 stories at a time.
Tasks.
Tasks, right.
Tasks.
And this means that the team can do either 6, either 3 items at a time.
Maybe, well, no. It's because the numbers, usually the numbers on the upper board are always smaller because those are items that are not like task level, right? They have this like an epic with a bunch of user stories.
Yeah, that's right. So my question is, one user story can be drastically bigger than another. It can require lots of development work. So we cannot say that we can do 3 or only this user story time.
Right.
It should be interrelated.
So think about those limits as upper limits. If the team chooses, if they get some big item, then they're not going to go all the way up to 3, they're going to stay with 1.
Okay.
Make sense?
Makes sense.
So the limits are upper limits, they're not written in stone. Okay? So I wanted to get the Scrum and Kanban out of the way. We'll get into something that's more Kanban specific. I mentioned experience with this, and what did you learn anything out of it? Or kind of what happened? Can you describe it like briefly?
Yes, we have some kind of game when we have some tasks, and this board, if you could see, this board divided in different types of work, like to do development, ops, UAT, and release. And then we have some limits, like people or like how it was called, resources. Yeah. So we have to move those tickets based on their limits we have during some like cycle. Yeah. For example, day. And each day we have some different resources and the limits, and we have up to 10 or more than that. Yeah,
so my question is, what did you learn out of the game? What are your top takeaways?
We understood their influence of the previous task, how we plan the day, and how it can influence on our results. And depending on the initial goal we were given, so we were given different goals. One goal to earn much money is more, if you could, was good. And the different team were given they need to decrease the cycle of their
to reduce their time to market.
Yes, and depending on this, we can see how our charts and each our action influence on our results. So it was really like practice, which show us each action and their results, and it's really pretty cool.
Okay, thanks. So the idea is that these 4 games are identical. So what's interesting about it, you give this team a goal, you give this team a different goal, and the results will be widely different. Then, at this other team, I slightly change a rule. Over here, these 2 teams are very collaborative, and here I say you cannot collaborate between departments. And you have to maintain as much work in progress as possible. So the game starts with 19 tickets on the board. So at this table, I will say you always have to maintain 19 tickets on the board. You release 1 or 2, you have to start 1 or 2. Okay? We'll see what happens when you do that. At some other team I may go, and right from the beginning I will say, okay, another team, I'm not actually going to change anything. Right? You want the team to just work on their own, okay, and see what happens. And these teams, they may have the same goal to make money, or they may have different goals. Like, okay, I want you to reduce your time to market. And typically, what you'll see some big differences. I'll let you see it on the presentation. So what's amazing is that you take people, usually from the same company. There are companies where I train 800 people. And you train these people, you have 4 teams. They have the same board, the same process, the same cards. Okay? Everything is identical. I just tweak a simple policy, right? It's a policy. This has nothing to do with technology. Let's see what happens. This is just after 1 day of playing. Sorry. 1 day takes about 10 minutes. Okay? They play for about 11 days. So they play 1 day and look how different it is. This team has done a lot. They have, the boards look very different, but that, you get the idea. The first column is ready, then it's investigate, it's development, okay? And by the more you roll the dice throughout the game, you're gonna have some good days and some bad days. I had some lighting issues here, but you can tell there's 2 things. One, there's a distribution chart. Let me see here. let me get another one. Oh yeah, I like this one better. So, this is actually the Nike, the company that makes running shoes. I had 4 teams, and I actually gave them, like I said, I had a team where I said, you have to keep all the work. Doesn't matter, you know, you finish, then start more, okay? And then I've had a team where I took 6 things off board. See how everybody starts, this is number 19. You see everybody starts with 19? This vertical line means they have 19 tickets on the board. Here, they drop from 19 to 13. And also, this team I asked, you cannot start any new work, you cannot start under any circumstances any new work policy until you get to 3 tickets on your board. This one shows how many tickets do you start every day. The vertical lines are days. And this is 8, 9, 10, 11, goes all the way to 21. Okay? So if we look at this chart here, you see that this team delivered, this is orange is a delivery line, okay? And yeah, what they deliver. And the black line here is how many tickets they start every day. So you see here they deliver 1 ticket on day 9, and then they deliver 1, 2, 3, 4 on day 10, and so on and so forth. And you see on day 9 they delivered 1, they started 1. It means that they maintain about the same amount of work in progress at any given time. You can see this one is spreading up actually. The black line and the orange line, they usually make the most money. They close usually the highest number of tickets, or sometimes the number of tickets they close and the money may not be very different than the other teams. But look what happens. At the end of the game, the number here at the bottom is their cycle time, their delivery time, at the end of the game. This is the team that kept as much work in progress as possible. This team here. They delivered 30 tickets, they made 59, let's call it $60,000. And their cycle time, on average, by the end of the game, is taking them 10 days to deliver a ticket. 10 days. Same game, people from the same company, with the same background. I took 6 tickets off their board, from 19 to 13. I tell them you cannot start any new work until you're down to 3 tickets, because I'm the consultant they hired, right? And look what happens. Their cycle time goes from 6.5 to 5 to 3.2. And then 1, 1. And these are averages here. Look at this. This is that team. You see the distribution? This is distribution of cycle times. And they're high up here into the 7 or 8 days because they have all this stuff, the old stuff that was on the board, which these things were started on day 1. Today is day 9 when the game starts. The game starts on day 9. So they have things that have aged as they move them. Because you start working on it, you start working on it, and they get here. And then you can see how this team maintained about 3 tickets, because look what happened. Look, you see everything is on the 1 day line. Look at the cycle times. 2 tickets here, 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3. And here they had some outliers, these are old legacy tickets that they finished. But from this point on, they didn't have any of the old tickets on the board that they started with. Isn't this counterintuitive? What is our tendency at work? Start more work, start more work. Why? Well, customer wants it. We have more customers. Most companies would be in a better place if they keep their work to the amount of capacity that they have. You don't have to tell the customer when you start work, but you will be delivering much faster. The customer doesn't care when you start. The customer cares when you're done. Yeah, he's going to ask you for a time and a schedule. Yeah, I know you have some challenges, and I have to admit and adapt my teaching and my perspective in the class with the folks here, because this is not, actually I've never worked with outsourcers. And I've been in this role as a coach, as a consultant, right? But I've been doing this I've been in IT for almost 20 years. And I managed outsourced teams, but I wasn't managing their work because they're providing me as a service. I was like your client, I was just yelling at them for what I want. Right? So let's look at this other team. So this is a team I did not mess with. I didn't tell them anything, like that team over there. Say, do your best, here's your call. So coming back to results, Look at the variety of the results. So, cycle time of 1, they made $80,300. They delivered 36 tickets. Okay? Here is the high rollers. This is actually the team I didn't mess with. This is a team of people that on average have been at Nike for at least 7-8 years. Some of them have been there for about 12 years. Very aggressive. The culture is very aggressive. When I say aggressive, they're very experimented, and aggressive not in terms of hurting each other, but in terms of hurting any opportunity for improvement they can find. They're very good at what they do. I was fascinated. So these people made $82,000. They delivered 39 tickets, and yes, their cycle time was a bit higher, but they made more money, right? And this team here, they also had some constraints. Their cycle time was somewhere in between, like 6.3. They delivered 31 tickets, and they made about $68,000. So you see this variation in money. This variation in the average cycle time at the end of the game, which is pretty much what is going to take them if they continue working this way, and the different number of tickets that they have delivered. So what are the lessons from this? I'm not saying that it is ideal to have only 3 items work in progress. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if you have a lot of complaints from your customers about how long it takes you to deliver services to them, this is a good point to start and to say, we have maybe too much work in progress. And what happens if we decrease it? Because this is a physical, I was showing this earlier in the day, Little's law. Right? There's a physical relationship between work in progress, time to deliver, and throughput. Look at the throughput. The throughput doesn't change much for the teams who work closely about the same. These teams work closely about the same. Right? They make closely about the same amount of money. Right? So at some point, it may not even make a difference anymore. But what if your competitive advantage, what if that thing that will keep you from destroying the company is cycle time? It may not be your case, right? But if I'm a customer, if you're a customer of one of these teams, where are you going to go get your stuff? Are you going to go to the team that does it in 10 days, in 6 days, in 4 days, or in 1 day? And those people guarantee you that they're going to do it in 1 day. Why? Because they're going to show you this. Right? They're going to show you the data. So this is our performance. And you see, from a revenue perspective, they can charge as much, the same amount of money as everybody else. They may be able to even charge a premium because it's maybe for some services it would be a big deal to get something in 1 day versus 4. Especially in the Western, and especially in America. Everybody wants everything right away. Anyway, this is not just because Nike is Nike. Here is another company. It's in a different part of the country, has a different culture. So this is where you see what a huge difference the culture makes. This is a very conservative company, totally opposed to the culture at Nike where it's very aggressive. But Nike makes sneakers, shirts, things like that. These people make weapons and satellites. They are more conservative. The average age at Nike of the people in the room was around 30 years old. The average age here is about 92. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But it's definitely close to 50. And people here have been here for a long time. Now, it doesn't mean that you're stupid if you're older. I'm almost 50. I have to say that. It doesn't. No, all it means is that they have been in very large organizations, very bureaucratic. The largest defense contractor in the United States is a $1 trillion company. A lot of people, a lot of policies, a lot of risk. They have to be considered. They're being trained, is being indoctrinated to be conservative. It shows in how they behave and how they make decisions. Remember Nike? You had 2 or 3 teams close to $80,000. Look, the most amount of money they made here, $62,000, $25,000. This is the team that, just like the team at Nike, was not able to collaborate and had to have as much work in progress as possible. See the difference in culture? The aggressive team, the one trying to game the system, you know, take any advantage of any opportunity for improvement, make decisions. Which work we gonna start? What we gonna start first? Because those tickets are not equal. Those tickets, some are bigger, some are smaller. Some require dev work and apps work, some require only dev work, some require only apps work. So there's a lot of combinations because it's just like tickets in life, at work, right? All the tickets are different. So that team made $60,000 and 30 tickets. This time made 25, 21. Remember, that team at Nike had about 10 point something. This one has 14 days. The one was about 10. This one is almost 14. And nobody made more than $62,000. And nobody got into those number of tickets they had over there. Unless, you know, this team. Which is interesting. This team, again, you see the team with the lowest cycle time. Look, cycle time of 8. 5.8, 13.5, and 6.6. And look here. This team, with the lowest cycle time, made the most money and closed the highest number of tickets by a big leap, 36 versus 26, 21, and 28. Simulation. It's a brilliant simulation, or game, whatever you want to call it. Does this make the point? Because I can show you this until New Year. I've been teaching about 3,000 people in the last 2 years or so. Okay, and these were their charts. And again, something similar here. Again, see, do not start, in this case, I did not remove anything from the board. I start with 19 tickets. You cannot start any new work until you're down to 3 tickets, and then you stick with 3 tickets. Okay? I didn't have the rule where, I didn't put any other rules on these teams actually. I let them play however they wanted. Look at their predictability. These guys here, very tight variation. Yeah, it takes us a long time. We have all this legacy. At some point, they got rid of the legacy. Boom, back to 1 day. These people are all over the place. This is a team of directors and vice presidents for the number 27 company, largest public traded company on the stock exchange. It's a $70 billion company. They're in healthcare. And all of them. This company is changed the whole culture based on the experience, not only the experience these managers had with the game. There is a relationship here between the companies. When I went to work with a defense contractor, I was there for a while. I got really good friends with one person, one guy there, who was kind of my main contact, right? And this guy says, you know, can I ask you a favor? I have a godson, right? Godfather, godson. I have my godson who is also in IT. And man, is he suffering and struggling. He's in charge of releasing the Mac operating system platform in this company. And it takes him 2 years to release the OS. Apple releases the OS about every year, right? So what's this guy's reputation? And how much does he hurt? And how much does his team hurt? And how are they treated? To make the long story short, I only meet with him over breakfast in the hotel, breakfast area. And I'm using cups and plates and sugar and all this stuff to kind of make up a board, to kind of talk some basics and some principles. Then his godfather is kind of mentoring him a little bit, right? They're very close, they're almost like family, like what, the godfather, godson's supposed to be, but they spend a lot of time together with their families and kids and everything. They took him from here, they skipped 3 levels, and they put him to report to a guy over here, and they said, we need to do this across this whole IT organization for this $70 billion company that actually is like Spectre. They want to take over the world. They already have about 150,000 employees, and they want to be the largest, and they're going to be. They're doing a very good job. They invest in people. People are working there. So next, after his story starts to be heard about all the VPs in the company, then I ended up starting to train and teach them and work with them. And guess who was asking the team to start more work, change priorities, start more work? These people. They freaked out. When I told them you cannot start any new work until you're down to 3 tickets, they said, Dragos, you want to win. We don't want to lose. We want to win. They're all going for money. I said, don't worry about it. I said, It's a game. No, you don't understand. We want to win. We can't let all the teams beat us. We're the senior VPs, and don't worry about it. You can't start anywhere. I actually had to take all the tickets off the table and put them in my pocket. At the end of the game, their faces turned red. They look at each other because look at the results. That's a leadership team. $87,000, 700. One day, finished 38 tickets. They finished 1 hour earlier than everybody else, which is the case usually for these teams. Which is the case in real life where teams say, our life has changed. We don't have to work so many hours. A lot of times it's not even about the customer. A lot of times the customer is happier. The customer maybe didn't even have a real problem with them. But the teams, they go from working crazy hours to work normal hours and have a balance. These teams are 88, 65, 2.5, 40, whatever. But this was the leadership team that has been driving changes. This was about 2 years, or 2014 in March. So we'll be 2 years in March 2016. I already trained about 300 people, and we keep going. And we go department by department by department. But they're very serious. Remember when I was making a joke and I was saying they're slow? Yeah, but there's an American expression, slow but steady. They're slow but steady. Like a humongous tank. Doesn't move very fast, but it's gonna get there. And nothing is gonna stop it. That's culture. The tank is the culture. Anyway, these are lawyers. It's a mess. I explained this earlier. So what do you think? Is that we've lost about half, now this gets manageable. The people who really want to be here are here. Either that or they're tired. You're just waiting for the after party. Does this make a point? Does it answer some of your questions? Because you say, for what projects? Give me anything. I'll slow and steady. I'll get it faster done than anybody else. Yeah, I have a lot of experience. You need to get it. You need to learn. But the most important part is to start. There's nothing you can do wrong. It's all about continuous improvement. See, if you're the slow team and you start like the 60,000, 25,000, 20 tickets versus 40, you're not 90. Doesn't matter because you're both gonna get there. 90 is gonna make it a little faster, but it's gonna be as good as it gets. And actually, Nike's culture has a lot of challenges because of that aggression, because of that competitiveness. There's going to be a lot of churn. There's going to be a lot of fight. This company actually is going to go a lot further, I think. But again, it doesn't matter. You start with what you do now, right? And then you agree to improve. I wasn't going to go through all these things. Let me take a look again here. So this Scrum stuff, how does it work? How does it, we get started? I think there's a lot of questions around some technical things. Let's see. How many people are interested in the change management and the people, the soft skills part of it? There aren't any questions actually there, but this is what that section is about. Anybody? 3 people? I guess you don't count. We'll move on. No, I'm kidding. Okay, I'm going to go really quickly through this. I'm just going through a couple of things which you know that these lines are equal, but they do look like the one at the bottom is longer. It's actually, it's not one of these for all of us. There's different questions that I ask, which the obvious answer is not the real answer. So don't try to solve this problem, but just look at the last paragraph. And this is from Daniel Kahneman. This is from the book Thinking Fast and Slow. And he doesn't have very good news for human beings. Okay? He says we're emotional, we make bad decisions, and he says that what we see is all there is, which is true, but the problem is that we only see, we think we're objective, we think that, what we see is the reality. Any degrees in psychology? Before I say anything anymore here? No? So basically this is how it works. You look at something, right? I'm looking not at something, I'm looking at a lot of people. But in general, you only take in about 4 to 5% of the information that's in front of you. 4 to 5%. Your brain now is starting to look for a match. And I'm familiar in you. If I go outside, I have no idea because my brain cannot find a match for all the alphabet. I know about half of the letters. I can guess some words. But I'm not familiar, right? And I've never been to Ukraine. I'm not familiar with a lot of things. So I'm confused, you know, there's some anxiety maybe. We have a tendency to be influenced by relevant numbers. It's called the anchoring effect. Even if you don't buy the book, look it up. Oh, by the way, hold on a second. I found the PDF version for free. All you have to do is Google Thinking Fast and Slow PDF, and there are 2 sources. Of course, they're both in India. I don't know what someone did scan, I don't know how they did it, but they did it, okay? And it's not easy to download, or it's not easy to read as a PDF. The book is quite thick. The audio version is about 26 hours. The book is easy to read by itself. But anyway, it's something else. You're not rational but instinctive. This is pretty much what you won the Nobel Prize for, because you prove this and you turned around the previous belief that people are logical. He says, no, we're not. We do not behave at all in the way that economic models would make sense or would tell you, you know, what to do. Okay, we do not maximize utility. This is not that something wrong with us. This is natural. This is how we operate. And these errors are built into our system. So that's a guy, he's still alive, he's still around, he's still teaching, he's still doing research. And part of the book he explained how there are 2 parts, 2 agencies in our brain. One is this one, he refers to it as system 1 in the beginning of the book, then he turns things around a little bit. But this one is very fast, it's slow to learn, and learns by experience. So if I ask you how much is 2 by 2, everybody knows is 4, right? And if I say, okay, and 17 times 39.5 is? Okay? But if you would do 16 times 39.5 every day because you do payroll and somehow you deal with this, right, you would know it. Alright? Well, that's system 2 that does all that. System 2 is, there's an issue with this, is slow, it says there. It's fast to learn. It learns from theory. It learns from theory, it's not really questioning the theory. System 1's job is to question, make comparisons, makes assumptions. System 1 recognizes that this guy here is closer to me than the lady over there. You know, right? That's all this sensory perception and pattern matching. If I hear a loud noise, or if you hear a loud noise, you're automatically going to turn towards it without even able to control yourself. And I use this in the other class. I ask people, do you find yourself talking and saying things to someone? And as soon as you say a few words or maybe more words, there's a voice in your head that says, oh my God, you're getting into so much trouble. But you keep talking. So system 1 keeps talking. System 2, the one who's slow, kind of wakes up. Right? That's how they work. What does that have to do with us? Well, this system 1 and system 2 govern how we process change. That's system 1 and that's system 2. And we are not system 1, just to be clear. That's not a costume, it's a robot. Okay? Daniel Kahneman says we resist change. Okay? And has a lot to say about it. But I'm switching here to a different guy who performed the most research in people, anxiety, and what generates anxiety. It says in Change Initiative there's 2 types of anxiety. There's survival and learning anxiety. You are in a performing environment, you are in a competitive environment, which is work. There are a lot of questions about promotion, about making more money, about being successful, right? About program managers who know or don't know what to do, or how can I get a better job. You are at this conference because you want to do a better job. Many times you want to do a better job than the person sitting next to you because you are for a competitor. Hopefully no one gets hurt today. Okay? But there's a lot of anxieties. Right? So what happens when you have change? All of a sudden, you're a Scrum Master. What do you mean I'm not the project manager anymore? What do I have to do to be successful? Well, you have to go and take a lot of training. You come from training and you go, what am I doing now? I remember half of the things, and all that training was pretty good. I liked the instructor, but it was just basics. Now I have to get the hard work. I have to get people, put them in small teams. I have to take the work, break it into small chunks. I've never done that before. All my previous experience is becoming worthless. Isn't that scary? Learning anxiety. Can I do it? Am I going to be successful? What happens if I fail? That's one of the questions I ask within the first 1 or 2 days when I work with a client. What happens around here when a mistake is made? Because that's going to change my approach to working with that organization. If it's fear-driven versus it's very trustworthy, right? So there's a lot of things that happen. We don't have the abilities of a chameleon, and change threatens self-esteem, identity, social status. If we believe we have more to lose than to gain, good luck with your change. I'll wait until you get tired of it, and then there'll be something new. That's what happens in a lot of American corporations. They've seen everything. Kanban is taking hold in all these corporations, and nothing ever succeeded. Remember the defense contractor that's been in business since World War I? And there are people, not they worked there since World War I, but there are people who worked there for 30 years, been through the training. They said that they have never stick to any of these initiatives, change initiatives and whatever, except for Kanban. They've been doing it for about 4 years. They have 800 Kanban boards, electronic Kanban boards, 800. And they keep buying licenses. Why? Well, here's why. First of all, you have to treat Kanban as a team sport. That's how we teach it. And actually, you can replace that with Scrum. Scrum is a team sport. Agile is a team sport. I started this for Kanban, and then I got too lazy to change it. I'm going to change it. Agile practices are a team sport, where maybe everything should be kind of treated like a team sport if you can. But it's not about command and control. And the high-performance leadership, and the way I work with leaders, and I do leadership coaching also, has to do with the leader being part of the team, providing support. And it's not necessarily telling everybody what to do. It's more around, it's not necessarily, that doesn't mean here that the leader also goes on site and writes code and develops, but there's a lot of interactions where these people are actually encouraged to take leadership. So you see this arrow, leadership, communication, and decision making. Leadership, communication, and decision making can happen at any level. And it can go back and forth. Over here, it only happens one way. Right? And in the context of high performance and leadership, what does leadership mean? There's a principle in Kanban that says leadership, practice leadership at all levels. In this case, leadership is not about the position, right? And you know that, and I think that's what Vera was saying. I don't Romanian, and I've had some exposure to Russian, so I understand very little, but I can make some sense. But I think she was saying things like this about leadership, about situational leadership, right? Okay. Well, what is leadership? And how do you build it? Does it grow on a tree? Can you buy it from, a store? Are you born with it? Can you develop it? Absolutely. Leadership development is based on exercising responsibility, which means ownership. You start to do things, and you get better at them, and that makes you happy. Why? Because you're building self-esteem. And self-esteem is critical on how you're going to respond to change. Why? Because you saw that earlier when we talked about anxiety and threats. If you are confident, and how are you going to be confident if every time you make a mistake you're being punished? Remember the positive and the negative reinforcement conversation from the other room? It's destroying self-esteem. That's what negative reinforcement does. It makes people afraid, disengaged, and I would rather be told what to do than to do something and be yelled at. It's a normal survival reaction. I love it. I love the fact that I came. I love everybody I've met here. I see how these folks at DevPro interact. how they work. They're workaholics, but they don't do that because they're afraid of someone. They're passionate, they love what they do. In a lot of American companies, this has been lost. And it has been, and where you can see that it was lost because this doesn't exist. People lost their self-esteem. And you have something that many companies, and I built teams in India, I built teams in Philippines, very large teams. I've been to India, I don't know, like 20 times. And you have something that's unique to you. And you know, what I was telling the folks that I met here, I said, you know, make sure you don't lose it. Because it's easy to start to get greedy and to start to yell at people and to say we want more, we want more, we want more. But guess what? The more you start, the less you're gonna finish, so good luck. You know, start Kanban, practice it, show the results, figure out how to balance these things. Because otherwise, I think the opposite doesn't have very good consequences. And it doesn't mean, oh, you have to abandon every methodology and do Kanban. No, God, no. Scrum works for you fine. Figure out, you know, what can you do? Maybe you can, all you do is you do Scrum, you start to measure the cycle times, you start to make sense of the cycle time, of the flow efficiency, of all these concepts you call in Kanban. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to explain all these things to you. But I'm just trying to make you curious so you can go and learn more. This is not, you know, there's a lot more context, but I'm just going to leave this in front of you a little bit. But what happens is, and why do you start to get more command and control? And probably some of you are experiencing here as you start to get more business and you're growing. I know DevCo has been growing to 200 people from what? From before, like 30? Yeah. You've been 30 for a while, and all of a sudden you grow to 200. What happens as organizations get larger is the first paragraph. Right? Someone was saying earlier, well, I hired a team who doesn't have a clue, how do I do? There are a lot of questions related to this, right? We're growing fast, we need to hire people. Well, you need to be patient in hiring process because people are your natural resources, like gas. Well, not that kind of gas. So, command and control is best intentions. I mean, nobody wants to screw up the company and nobody wants to do bad things to people. But a lot of times it's a short sight and is a reaction to the fear that we're growing so fast and if I don't put processes in place then I'm not going to be predictable. Right? And the first thing that it kills is innovation. But anyway, can we do something about this? The Kanban practices, despite the fact they're very simple English words, the Bible has very simple words. It doesn't have technology. It doesn't come with software. But how powerful religion is. We know. We need 20 minutes of that. But they're simple words, right? So Kanban makes visible these gaps. Everybody has you know, I don't care if it's PMI, if it's sprints, if it's whatever you do. And actually, this is not even, you know, this is borrowed from a different methodology, but I don't want to confuse you. But pretty much everybody has some sort of plans, some sort of actions, and some sort of outcomes. The problem is that you don't pay attention to the gaps. And those are the things that get us, right? You'll probably see quotes from Peter Drucker and from Deming at any agile event that you go. You're not going to see a lot of this. Why Kanban? And why do some of these methodologies succeed and fail? So this goes to the question that people have asked, when should I use Kanban, for what type of projects, for what type of work? It's not necessarily about the type of project or the type of work. It's more around the context, the type of systems in which those projects exist. And what we have here, we have ordered systems and unordered systems. And what's the difference between simple and complex, for example? A simple system has very well-defined constraints and boundaries that never change. Nothing really changes in a simple system. This is more like a tier 1 support team. Make sense? the customer calls, they get the question, they sense, they go through a series of questions, they categorize, they don't even know the answer. They have a knowledge-based article that they go through. Actually, as I manage call centers and I build software for call centers, you make them in such a way that as you ask the question and you mark an answer, more options open below. More options open below, well, actually it's actually less and less. And at some point, you're presented with an answer. You give it to the customer, works like magic. At least 90% of the times. When it doesn't, you escalate to tier 2. Why? Because now you probably found something that's a bit more complicated than a simple system. The simple system also has very, has boundaries and constraints. However, the problem, the root cause is potentially knowable. It requires some analysis. Over here, you deal with categorization. Over here, you deal with analysis before you can respond. To do analysis, you are not in, if you are in a tier 1, you probably not able to do analysis anymore, right? So you analyze and you respond. So over here, you rely on standard operating procedures. This is kind of a US government, I don't know if you use this word. Whenever you see someone with SOPs, he's working with the government. Best practices. A lot of people every time say, Dragos, can you give us some best practices we should follow for Kanban? Yeah, I can, but you're likely going to fail because in our work we don't deal with simple systems. What you need is better practices. Okay, and I'll come back to that concept. So, best practices and standard operating procedures work here. Over here, you need expert judgment. You need system thinking, scenario planning, plan A, plan B. We're gonna try to deploy a fix. We better have a rollback plan. How many people talk about rollback plans when they deploy something to production or they send something to the customer? Okay? I didn't have to, I don't know. I was lucky to work for companies where actually this was indoctrinated into me from day one. Okay? You don't do anything without a rollback plan. Okay? Alright, so now we move into unordered systems and we come back to complex systems, which I was explaining earlier today. The boundaries change as you interact with the system. And if you try to apply this kind of best practices over here, you're going to be very much surprised. What happens when you treat complex systems as simple, you end up in a chaotic situation. And it's very hard to recover. Because they are incoherent, right? Over here, all you do is crisis management. And you're kidding yourself if you think you're going to prevent it and try to prevent it the next time it happens. I'm sorry to bring this subject up, but like what happened in Paris a few weeks ago falls into this chaotic situation. Can you prevent it? No, you cannot. So coming back to complex, does it mean, where can you apply Kanban? Well, you can apply it pretty much anywhere in here. You can, at some point you can apply it here, but if you think, again, this is not something you manage. This is something that you respond to. But how you implement Kanban, now it comes back as an implementation question. How are you going to build your board? The behaviors of the team, the goals that you have are going to be different based on what problem you're trying to solve, and that is based on the context of your problem. So this is something that, I don't know, maybe it's sparks some curiosity and you want to explore more. But this is what I have seen that is very rarely common knowledge. The fact that we always and everybody asks for best practices. Is that true or false? Everybody is looking for the easy way out. There is no easy way out. Here is the difference between the left and the right side. Over here, best practices actually work all across. So what happens now, you look for, you want to replicate success. That's why you say best practice means what? Someone has been very successful at doing this. Tell me how you did this so I can do it. So in this case, trying to replicate success works. The danger here is if you deal with complex systems, over here you do not want to replicate success because your situation is going to change. Even if you're successful fixing something today, and you say, oh, next time this happens, you're going to do the same thing, you're going to have a surprise. So here, instead of trying to replicate success, you focus on eliminating failure. So you focus on how can we get better. And that's why here we talk about it's better practices, right? The beauty and what I love about Kanban, and I'm not a salesperson, and I don't do this because I make any extra money from sales. I have a fixed salary, and I can make the same money or more staying home and not traveling all over the world, like 70% of the time. Because when we implement Kanban systems, if you do it right, the Kanban system doesn't really care much. Now, if you have to do doing and done, you're definitely on the right side. Because you're not looking for patterns, you're not collecting data that you should be collecting. And you cannot, because over here, you manage through patterns. Right? And you want to catch something as a pattern forms. Remember those cumulative flow diagrams? Remember the distribution of cycle times and how they were clustering? And you can see how much variation you have. Remember how you look at those and you see as you reduce work in progress, your cycle time gets shorter? Those are patterns. And you say, what's good enough for me? Do I want to have the 2.5 cycle time and make maybe more money and maybe have less tickets? Or do I want to have a cycle time of 1, and even if I make less money, it's okay because I beat the hell out of any of my competitors, right? So then you figure out how to sell more of that and how to hire more people. So this is a concept that firefighters work. And again, I'm a little bit out of my depth here, right? Because that's how they design their service. So how are you designing your services? Do you have emergencies that you need to respond to? Do you know how fast you need to respond to them? Do you know how long it takes you to respond to an emergency when you have one? Because you have to design your capacity of the team and these services with that in mind. So it means, you have to have some idle time. So this is the last old guy I'm gonna have you look at for the day. And it's also my quote for a couple of years now. Do these methodologies matter? I will tell you from my perspective, no. But you need to adapt your methodology. I don't care what you use. You need to adapt your methodology so you have continuous learning. And not to think that I have to learn something that I'm going to use over and over again the same way, the same way, the same way. That will only work if you are on that right side into simple and maybe, okay, thank you. You could have told me, you didn't have to run out to find one. So I have 1 minute left, and I have slides for about 14 more days. Did you find this helpful?
Yes.
Because based on the things that you've had, see, I kind of formed some patterns, and I realized that you actually are showing some symptoms, and I would rather go after the root cause a little bit, which would solve a lot of these symptoms, right? And remember, I asked you the question: how many people are interested in the soft part of the change management? And only about 4 hands were up. Remember what the last old guy was saying about our ability to kind of make decisions in a way that could be better. So the Kanban boards, what happens, and we didn't get, guys, there's no way that I can work with so many people. By the time if I go into technique, there's going to be 100 questions in 1 minute from everybody. We had about 12 people. How many people in the class? 13, 14 people? Yeah, there were lots of questions. Yeah. You need to understand why you're doing. You need to understand why, why would you switch to Kanban. I discourage customers a lot. Customers that, especially if they're large, and it will take a big change for them to switch methodologies. I would say, let's try to find out why you have challenges with Scrum. Like, oh, no, Scrum doesn't work for us. It's not that Scrum does. Scrum doesn't, it's not like Scrum works or doesn't work. How do you use it? And do you have the discipline? you know, to use the artifacts. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, Scrum is going to fit into any situation, so but, you know, a lot of times what we do, we insert some of these concepts. Some concepts, you know, there's concepts from PMI, there's concepts from Kanban, that we insert part of the practices the organization has, and we help them go after the root cause of why they're failing with whatever methodologies they use. And guess what is the number one every single time? It's work in progress. Most of the questions we get today from organizations and the requests for help are around, we have too many dependencies, we need help to manage these dependencies. I already know in my head the answer is, yeah, we need to reduce the work in progress. The other thing that the same customer is telling me is, we're not doing anything different than what we were doing 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we didn't have a problem. And every year, since 3 years ago, we don't know what happened. But everything takes longer and longer and longer, and now we can't finish anything. And I said, really, nothing happened? No, nothing happened. Are you growing? Are your services doing well in your customers? You have more customers? Oh yeah, absolutely. Would it be that you start a lot more work with the same number of people? Did you add more people? Did you got more customers and more work? No, we can't really do that. So nothing happened. No? How much work do you have in progress for 80 people? Oh, I don't know. Let's take a look. 2,000 things that are up to 3 years old. Would that have anything to do with the fact that you can't finish anything? Because people run left and right, or a little bit here, a little bit there, then emergency is coming. And what happens is, and you probably feel this, all they deal with is emergencies. And they feel like, I can't plan for anything, I'm constantly in a state of response. And then the same customer says, well, yeah, but you know, we can't stop working on all these other things. You see how this insane this is? Because I've heard, and I've seen actually a comment on Instagram from someone saying, well, this makes sense to not start new work before you finish, but you know, this is not practical. Okay? So keep going. Hopefully, you know, you just have to try harder. Start more work in progress. Okay? There's really no magic, you know, don't look for magic because there isn't any. So how do customers do it? So I know I'm past my time, so I'll be brief here. They start building, they start to learn about Kanban, they build these boards. And initially you start to look at all the work you have in progress. You start to put things on these boards. You realize there's a whole lot. You're actually going to find a lot of junk. You're going to find a lot of work in progress. And maybe this is not the case for the type of business most of you are in, right? But for most IT organizations, if they have things that are 3 years old, or even, you know, there are organizations that put policies in place after they implement policies, and anything longer than 6 months, you know, we're closing it. Now, it's not your case because you're not in IT. Is anybody here in the internal IT organization of a company? Yeah. See, I didn't know that coming to Ukraine actually. So I learned that. I was surprised and I was actually a bit frustrated because I didn't understand why people were asking the questions they're asking. But then I learned quickly and hopefully I adapted well. Right? But those are the things that I deal with mostly. The problem doesn't change. The problem doesn't change. What changes is that you can close anything. So I have clients like this. They're usually, again, there's attorneys in the Department of Homeland Security. Because they get requests from customers and they cannot close anything. Everything has to be done and many of them have some deadlines and contracts around. And many times they cannot hire people. I think that what is to your advantage, and, you know, I may be wrong, but I think that as you take more work, you are charging money for this work. Most of these other of my customers, they do not charge any money, and they don't have that luxury. So at some point you have to get good at sharing knowledge, at having some processes in place in which you can ramp up people quickly, but just because you ramp up them quickly, it doesn't mean that you can, you know, there's going to be some failures. And typically what we have done with India, when we were building things there, we had a lot of failure, mostly was failure. But we looked at it as an investment. Microsoft looked at it as an investment. So we kept building, we kept hiring more people, and I can tell you that 2 years later, we weren't getting any money out of it. And we spent billions of dollars into building infrastructure, sponsoring construction of a new airport in Hyderabad, and doing all sorts of things. And right now, I don't even know how many people are in, but we keep building. You know, there's a lot of work done in India with very high quality. It takes time, but it's an investment. And if you think there's any secret to just all of a sudden, you know, you are in this business, you're doing a good job, you have to figure out how much, to what degree can you invest in the people you have. You have to invest in processes. I have seen and I have heard from people in the class, and I have seen this in India. We corrected it and we got hold of it. You have to be able to ramp up people very quickly. Whatever you do for your customers, you have to figure out what is likely that we're going to see again. Build a knowledge base, you know, so you can share knowledge. Because you're going to have someone over here banging her head against the wall trying to figure something out. And she may be doing that for 2 weeks to find out how to do it in 4 hours. But what if she doesn't share that with anybody, and there's 40 more people in this organization? And each person spends 2 weeks instead of 4 hours. It's a big waste. And what happens when you hire new people? There's more waste. Kanban, and you remember my handle on Twitter is weightlifter, W-A-I-T, not, I've been doing those two for a long time. But weightlifter is because it's all about lifting the weight time. It's all about reducing that weight time. So I'll close with that one thing that I said, it's about flow efficiency. If you have a flow efficiency of 10%, it means that if it takes you 100 days to do something, only 10 days people are working on it, are touching it. 90 days is sitting somewhere waiting for resources. Why? Because you have too much work in progress and everybody is spread very thin. Okay? That's about, you know, all I can cover in 2 hours. I hope you got something out of it. At least it made you curious. But you're gonna have to go through that learning, relearning, and unlearning. I think I love everything I have seen here and the people I've met. I'm going to Romania next to see some friends. I know they are in a very similar situation. You have to figure out how to attract, you know, a lot of you work with a lot of dysfunctional customers, from what I hear. You have to figure out how to attract the kind of customers you're going to work with. You know? But in the meantime, you need money. So again, but there's a balance. And you can't say, you know, I'm going to go and hire people who don't have a clue about what they're doing. And I'm going to take a project that I don't know how to fix it, because you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You look very promising. But unless you have a rollback plan to go to Cuba with your PM, I may not take that to work. Right? So, thank you for coming. I will put some references in the material I'll send back. I'll try to put something together around here, some steps, some books, but nothing beats to start to practice with this. Right? You need to know where to start. And hopefully, I mean, if you guys want, I can come back and we can do some workshops. Thank you for your time.